Hi, I'm Oliver Husain. I'm a filmmaker from Toronto. I'm here at Forum Expanded exhibition with my installation ISLA Santa Maria 3D. It's a stereoscopic, time-traveling, queer science fiction space opera. And it's based on the myth of the Santa Maria, of a replica of the Santa Maria, Columbus's ship that formed an island. And the show is up until the 20th at the Akademie der Künste Hanseatenweg.
Dear representatives of your planets, as you all know from personal experiences, these are bad times. Your worlds are in crisis. I must warn you, however, what has seemed an epic journey so far was only the prequel to a sprawling multi-part narrative.
Welcome, Oliver Husain.
Thank you.
Director of ISLA Santa Maria 3D. You are part of the exhibition from Forum Expanded this year. How did you come to Berlin? Did you get invited by Forum Expanded? Or?
Yes, yeah. It's although it's an exhibition, it works the same way. Like I submit something, and then there's a committee that selects it. So it's kind of similar to the other programs in the festival, only that it's an exhibition. So I had to ship stuff, other stuff than just the video.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, when did you start to work on this project?
About 3 years ago, and we filmed it 2 years ago. And then it took me 1 year or a bit over a year to work on the post-production. I did the video post-production myself, and it was my first time doing 3D. And that was a much steeper learning curve than I had expected, so I had to learn a lot, teach myself through tutorials, like the softwares, and encounter a lot of problems. Yeah.
So you didn't aim for this exhibition, it was just like a process of
Yeah, it was first shown in
post-production.
Yeah, it was first shown in Toronto last year, and this is the first international showing.
Okay. So how did the audience react on the project in Canada?
In Toronto,
yeah. And what was the circumstances it was screened in? Was it a film festival or was it like an art installation?
It was an art installation. It was a gallery installation in a small artist-run center in Toronto, and so it was only this work was there. So it's like a one-room place, and a lot of the. So this film was really a collaboration with a lot of my friends, or with my groups of friends. So a lot of them are on camera or behind the camera. As you can imagine, that was also the audience, like for the opening a little bit. So it was very, it was a very. It makes a lot of sense for this film that the people who were sitting there watching it with the 3D glasses were also on screen, because that's a little bit what the installation does. So the installation is an auditorium, right? There's we built these benches and there's a little stage, and then there's the screen, and there are kind of puppets or glass holders for the 3D glasses that look like noses, like human noses, and so the glasses kind of sit there already when people enter, and if you're a gallery visitor, maybe you're by yourself or you're not, there's hardly ever a full audience for a gallery. So I thought about this problem. That you're kind of alone in a space looking at this thing that was supposed to be a 3D film, like a blockbuster. So I wanted this feeling of being amongst others to look at it. So that's why there's this kind of shadow audience around you of the glasses and the noses looking at the screen, while there's also people on screen that look back at you.
I was sitting in the back when I saw the film yesterday. And I was like a bit irritated because like I had like this, I had like other people they were watching the film like in front of me, but now I understand that.
Yeah, but that's also when I go to the cinema and see a 3D film, that's kind of my favorite moment is when the credits sequence starts and suddenly the spaces kind of mix. So you still have you're wearing your 3D glasses and you're still, immersed in that space of the screen or that perspective that you're looking at. But then you also suddenly see the seats or people getting up, and there's this mix of two spaces suddenly coming together. And I find that, the best part, right? Like that's when you start, this confusing overlap of perspective.
So it's a good moment to ask you about like 3D projection. So why did you want to make a film in 3D? What was interesting you about this technique?
Well, one reason is that I enjoy watching it in the cinema. I enjoy watching these kind of films, and I realized that a lot of people don't. Like a lot of people find it nauseating, or often people say it's like something that is actually not needed, which I find kind of absurd, right? Like often when you read a review, people say like, yeah, but the 3D wasn't really needed. And it's like, yeah, but it's like saying
the idea.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, so I was drawn to it because I enjoy it. And then the other reason was that so a lot of my previous work is interested in this idea of the screen as a window, or the screen as a stage, or the screen as another kind of reality that we're looking into, and how that relates to the auditorium of the cinema itself. So, for example, I did a series of projects that were playing with this idea of the auditorium, where the auditorium suddenly was like the main space.
Okay.
One was shown here in Berlin as part of the Jack Smith Festival, and we had like two drag performers holding a screen that where the film was projected. And by the end of it, they started to kind of climb with the screen in their heels over the rows of the auditorium. It was quite heavy, so people had to like help them or like kind of protect themselves. So yeah, this idea of making the auditorium itself and that space collide with the cinema, with the screen space. I mean. That was something I had already done previously, and I think that's why like 3D was kind of a perfect medium for that.
How would you situate your message and your approach in larger spectrum and framework of power structures? I mean, you were speaking about like these different rooms of like the screen and the auditorium. So I think it's quite interesting when you just like break this like two separate rooms usually, or like in general. But
so in this one, I think I wanted to play with to make it clear that with these noses or the puppets that are sitting there, and they're quite stiff, right? Like because they're just on sticks, and so it's a little bit like they're making fun of the audience as well, right? Like it's like a caricature of an audience that's kind of sitting there stiffly.
A consumer.
But for 3D cinema, you actually have to. 3D cinema needs a immobile viewer, right? It's not a very democratic art form in that way. It is like you have to like fixate onto the screen. And one thing that I learned is that there's only one seat or one space in the cinema where you in the cinema when you're watching a 3D film that gives you an undistorted view. So all of us in the normal seats we see a slightly distorted perspective. So there's only one kind of correct seat, which would be kind of maybe flying above the audience closer to where the projector is. And so I thought about this kind of royal perspective, in the theater, and about the camera and viewing. So I felt like these ideas of perspective and power are already at play in 3D, and that's why I chose a narration that also connects imperialism, or the history of imperialism, and the history of explorers and looking at the world through with the imperial gaze, yeah, to connect that with 3D film and with the technology that I'm using. So the narration of the film and the dance sequences with the dancing conquistador and his binoculars, they kind of play with these ideas and these connections. Yeah.
So you just said that you're reframing the history, especially about the Isla Santa Maria and Christopher Columbus going to the so-called New World, but you're also facing the future. It's
it's a time traveling.
Yeah. So
narrative.
what was this idea behind it? So why did you just not only think about the past and how we, from a Western point of view, look on other worlds, different worlds, as imperators, but also into future where it's uncertain what's going to happen.
So one reason was that, like I said, my reference point was not so much art cinema or how artists have worked with 3D cinema, but really blockbuster cinema or popcorn cinema, and so the form of a science fiction felt like the right thing to choose, right? That's often what those kind of narratives do, and then. My starting point was really this story of the Santa Maria, the replica of the Santa Maria that was built 400 years after the first real Santa Maria. So I thought about, so there's already this kind of gap of 400 years, and why not add another 400 years? And then, so the film takes place in 1492, 1893, and 2294, right? That's kind of the 400-year jumps that are kind of conflated in the film. And that's the answer to that. Yeah.
You mentioned in the beginning that a lot of your friends were behind the camera, behind the scenes, or acting for your project.
Yeah.
So how important was this kind of family that you just were working with for you and this project in special?
Oh, that's a great question. So it was really important. So I actually really kind of very consciously included my different scenes in the film. So for example, in the future part, there are the representatives of their planets, and so all of them are very elaborately costumed, and they represent their own, whatever they want their planet was, and so
you gave them total freedom.
I gave them total freedom, and they really created those costumes and those outfits themselves.
Wow.
But I knew that they could. I knew that because I know them, and I know that they would enjoy this, right? So this was one. So one group of them is. So ever since me and my partner have been living in Toronto, we've been throwing a party that's been kind of continuously growing, and it's a drag party called Hot Nuts in Toronto, and it's actually one of the reasons why we're still there. We've kind of found our kind of people with that party, and there are a lot of other people involved in it now as well. So that's kind of one group there, and then the other one is is SAVAC, the South Asian Visual Arts Center. It's another of my group. So my background is my family's from India, and one reason why Toronto is great for me because it has a huge diaspora from South Asia, meaning the Indian subcontinent, and so so those people are in there as well. So it's like this. It feels really like a family meeting in a way. And for this one, because the film talks about it, one thing that it does talk about is how kind of the colonial curse that we kind of still deal with in our life, how that could be, in the future be surpassed, how there could be some sort of other, like an utopian idea imaginable. And so I wanted to have this, I didn't want to, show a utopia, but I wanted to have this feeling of community somewhere in the visuals, or have that kind of ideal demographic of diversity and queerness, you know, in these groups that you see in the film,
But
already realized, kind of. Yeah. Even in the scenes from 1893, yeah, they're very. They're cast like with a very multicultural crew of people, and there's a drag queen, you know. So it has this kind of, for me, it has this kind of utopian moment already there in the past.
this is what you can clearly see as a viewer if you just like, especially like this scene what you just like mentioned, like in 1893, that it's like a pretty colorful and like pretty mixed and like not, it's like not only like straight white man, like no, it's like you are queering the screen, definitely.
Yes, yeah.
So I think it has been a lot of fun to shoot this movie, right? I mean, with a lot of your friends.
Absolutely.
And
Yeah, absolutely. So like I said, it was really this process of collaboration. It was not, and it was quite open. It was fun to shoot this. Yeah.
And what's interesting as well, that you just like, I mean, the La Isla Santa Maria went like from Europe, or like sailed to Europe, from Europe to America. But your family history relates to that as well, what you just like mentioned. So you have
Right,
like
yeah.
family. Was this like important for you too? To just like,
I think yes, for sure. Like that I'm like not only in this film but in a lot of my previous work, the narrations about migration and those kind of storylines are very often the basis or a starting point for me, for sure. In that way, yeah.
so what
Is that what you're
Yeah.
hinting at? Yeah.
So what do you think, like, what is your vision for your very personal future, and like for my future too? Like, I mean, I'm including myself, like, because like you said, like you're thinking in like kind of friends and family structures. So what you wish or dream for the future and for the world?
Oh, I don't know. This is a beautiful idea and a beautiful vision. You know, the other kind of utopian image that the film also creates is that the remains of the Santa Maria, so the ship model, the replica, actually deteriorated after the World Fair. It kind of fell apart into a pile of dirt, and so that is the actual Isla Santa Maria, is this pile of dirt.
This what I
that
didn't
is,
understand, but there's
okay.
like really like it's a
Well,
it's,
that's a
the myth.
myth. Yeah, that's
Okay.
a myth. So it's something that I found online, and that story actually started this whole project. That the replica of
I see.
of the Santa Maria, which you know is so symbolic for all these dark histories, right? And so that fell apart, and then something grew, like a new island is of course an image of hope,
life
of new
starts
life, yeah.
again.
So, but it's also a ridiculous image, right? So it's also a ridiculous pile of mud that then in the film gets elevated to this utopian standpoint. So I don't only have I have this kind of rosy vision, but also a more complicated vision about the future, like that. One source for me was a very I think a lot of people who read queer theory love the book by Jose Munoz about queer utopias, and so that was another starting point for me. And he thinks about this idea of queerness itself as something that is utopian, that queerness is only something that we can kind of strive for, or that is not realized yet, and that is an ideal that is worth fighting for. Yeah, so that is maybe another answer to this.
Is this what's you driving as an artist? Like, I mean, like maybe feeling exclusion, or like, I mean, Canada is like quite very open, like in LGBT rights. very different to many other places in the world.
That's true, yeah.
So, I mean, by this, it's like quite a utopian place for you to live, I think. But
sure, yeah. I mean, now that I've been there for a long time, over 10 years now, I also see where that dream has its cracks, or where it's not, where it's not that, or also the diversity of it, or the openness that is especially now is again once more very being made very public. I see where the problems with that are, but yeah, you're right. For me, especially coming from Germany, especially that kind of context of diversity or the discourses around migration that I found there, that were at this very different level than they are here, or they seem to be, at least. That was definitely something that attracted me there, and it's still something that makes me feel at home there. Yeah.
But do you feel still at home in Berlin too? When you have lived
never,
here for several years, you never felt
No, in Berlin I've never lived, actually.
Oh,
I lived in Frankfurt.
And Frankfurt, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
My brother was here, but I never lived here. It was kind of like either I moved to Berlin or to Toronto, and then it was Toronto.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oliver, thank you so much for this interview.
Oh, you're very welcome. Tutorials, like the softwares, and encounter a lot of problems. Yeah.
So you didn't aim for this exhibition, it was just like a process of like...
Yeah, it was first shown in...
post-production.
Yeah, it was first shown in Toronto last year, and this is the first international showing.
Okay. So how did the audience react on the project in Canada?
In Toronto,
yeah. And what was the circumstances it was screened in? Was it a film festival, or was it like an art installation?
Yeah, it was an art installation. We had to ship stuff, other stuff than just the video. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, when did you start to work on this project?
About 3 years ago, and we filmed it 2 years ago. And then it took me 1 year, or a bit over a year, to work on the post-production. I did the video post-production myself, and it was my first time doing 3D, and that was a much steeper learning curve than I had expected. So I had to learn a lot, teach myself through tutorials. The 20th at the Akademie der Künste Hanseatenweg.
Dear representatives of your planets, as you all know from personal experiences, these are bad times. Your worlds are in crisis. I must warn you, however, what has seemed an epic journey so far.
Hi, I'm Oliver Husain. I'm a filmmaker from Toronto. I'm here at Forum Expanded exhibition with my installation ISLA Santa Maria 3D. It's a stereoscopic, time-traveling, queer science fiction space opera. And it's based on the myth of the Santa Maria, of a replica of the Santa Maria, Columbus's ship that formed an island. And the show is up until...
was only the prequel to a sprawling multi-part narrative.
Welcome, Oliver Husain.
Thank you.
Director of ISLA Santa Maria 3D. You are part of the exhibition from Forum Expanded this year. How did you come to Berlin? You get invited by Forum Expanded, or?
Yes, yeah. It's although it's an exhibition, it works the same way. I submit something, and then there's a committee that selects it. So it's kind of similar to the other programs in the festival, only that it's an exhibition.